Some consider LG's first 4K 240Hz OLED to be a disaster, and others think it's the best monitor ever made. Which is true, though? It was absolutely a disaster on release, but there's been a huge firmware update which many believe could save this monitor. But before we all start freebasing copium, I decided to get to the bottom of it by installing it and thoroughly testing it in CalMan Ultimate using many thousands of dollars worth of testing equipment, including a spectrophotometer and colorimeter so that I can be pretty confident in my results. Now, after updating everything and power cycling the display properly, let's see if they've fixed the main firmware issues such as extreme shadow detail crush and poor EOTF tracking, which I found in my initial review. And the great news is, yes, they have indeed addressed the crushed black issue to a large extent. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Affiliate links in the show. Okay, enough of the shtick. Unfortunately, this monitor still has way too many problems. I mean, yes, it's great that they've fixed that shadow detail issue. That was a big problem, but in terms of issues for starters, on the peak brightness high mode, this monitor still can't track EOTF properly to save its life, which is important because the whole point of HDR is to increase the amount of detail on the screen. If you blow out the detail by over-brightening objects or lose it by crushing shadows, you might as well take an SDR monitor and turn the brightness up. I mean, look at these results here, guys. On a, need I remind you, $1,400 monitor in the year of 2024, which cannot be fixed. In HDR, as you can see, it is not properly tracking EOTF at all. It is completely wild. And even the RGB balance is a little bit off, unfortunately. And again, I can't fix it. They have very rudimentary controls over what you can and can't fix on this thing in its current firmware, which means you're stuck with blown out highlights and, at least fortunately now, somewhat proper shadows. So at least there's that. But to be fair, you know what? Their sRGB mode, not too bad. Yeah, the RGB balance was off out of the box. It was way too blue. However, that can actually be changed and corrected, and you can end up with a very good overall sRGB experience. So for non-HDR gaming and apps, this monitor is perfectly suitable now, which is great. However, back to HDR, because guys, this is a $1,400 HDR monitor. I mean, that is one of the biggest reasons you would buy this, is for HDR. And not only can it not follow EOTF properly, but take a look at this color checker analysis. You can see here that the delta E is definitely beyond something that could be considered perceivable by humans. Now, if they gave us better control on the white point, we could probably fix this up a little bit, but I think a lot more work needs to be done here, and some of this might actually just be down to the fact that they're working with very limited color brightness here. It seems to be nerfed pretty substantially on that color brightness, even when compared to their TVs, because yes, LG OLED will have lower color brightness than Quantum.OLED, but on their TVs, you can get some pretty good results. That's not the case here on this monitor. It just isn't too good in my opinion, and I certainly wouldn't use this for professional HDR work, although, I mean, come on, it's a gaming monitor. But regardless, I would like it to be, pretty accurate in HDR, as if I'm enjoying an HDR game, I want to try and enjoy it as best I can according to the creator's intent, something that seems basically impossible on the current firmware thanks to the poor EOTF tracking and pretty wild colors where it's just not where it should be in HDR. So can I recommend this monitor? Finally, has the firmware fixed everything? No, absolutely not. While this monitor does have huge potential thanks to the, in my opinion, best OLED pixel arrangement with the RGWB making for pretty crisp text in the best case scenarios, and probably the best speakers I've heard on a monitor, and that really cool 480Hz mode. Yeah, I mean, this thing has a ton of potential, but unfortunately, it has a gaggle of issues, including it needs the on-screen control for updating the firmware, which is ridiculous. It has low color brightness, unimpressive HDR brightness, which honestly, you put this next to a QD OLED, which honestly, those 32 inchers also don't get that bright. And I think overall you would be far more impressed with the 32-inch QD OLEDs. It also has bad HDR EOTF tracking, bad HDR color accuracy, very basic HDR color temperature control, a grainy, low-quality matte coating, poor 1080p scaling quality. Swapping to 1080p mode for the 480Hz can sometimes crash games in my experience, and the price is just far too high. I think it's still frequently around $1,400. Maybe sometimes you can get it a little bit lower, but that is just still ridiculous for all these problems that it has. They should not be asking $1,400 for this when sometimes you can get a QD OLED for $900, $950 from MSI. That's a pretty huge discrepancy. And yes, there are some more expensive QD OLEDs as well, but in my opinion, they are better and they're still cheaper than this. We're talking $1,100, $1,200, $1,300. And again, I think they're better. So fellas, I think it's time we stop running defense for massive corporations charging extremely high prices for what I think in this case is a somewhat poor quality display in its current firmware. They really need to start launching products with far better firmware at launch, and going forward, if you own this monitor, I urge you to please wait for in-depth reviews before purchasing honestly any product so you can make the best decision possible. And also make sure to watch many different reviews from me and other content creators as well, as you never know who does or doesn't know what they're talking about, or if they've made mistakes, or who may or may not be incentivized to give a good review to something. Now, is this monitor irredeemable? And I think to many people the answer is no, but there are some things they absolutely need to fix for me to even consider recommending it when more affordable and better 32-inch 4K 240Hz QD OLED monitors exist, such as they need to improve the HDR color brightness. They used to have this issue on their LG G3 series TV from last year, and then on the G4, they significantly bumped the brightness in the gaming mode, thereby fixing that gaming brightness issue that I think we're seeing right now on this monitor. It seems like they're, once again, nerfing gaming brightness to my eye, leading to a somewhat unimpressive HDR experience. Also, they need to improve the 10% window brightness. I mean, when we're talking 600-700 nits, maybe at best with incorrect tracking on this thing in terms of 10% window, they should really be shooting for around 1,000 nits in a 10% window to give you far more impactful HDR experiences. They also need to improve the HDR EOTF tracking so that it doesn't blow out highlights. They need to improve the color control in HDR. They need to lower the price to $1199, I think at most, or $200 lower. And honestly, long-term for their next product, they have got to swap the matte coating to a glossy coating like we see on their LG TVs. It's not only way more clear, way more vibrant, and overall a far better picture. It's not even close. It's night and day. The matte coating looks genuinely bad. The glossy coating looks genuinely good. And of course, obviously a good coating should be paired with an expensive, good display. But also, to be honest with you, their glossy coatings, I think, do a pretty good job of minimizing reflections and handling ambient light well, something that I can't say for QD OLED. QD OLED Glossy has some pretty severe issues with ambient light. Definitely not the case on the LG C series TVs, and even the G series TVs, while it does have some ambient light issues, is nowhere near as bad as QD OLED, and that's still glossy, so you're still getting all those benefits. So they really got to change to a true glossy display if they want to have some sort of anti-reflective properties. That's totally fine, just like their TVs. That works great, but we cannot be using a matte coating anymore. It honestly looks very poor. It's not acceptable at this price point. So right now, I just don't recommend buying it. And in fact, if you recently purchased this and you're still within your return window, I do actually suggest returning it and buying a QD OLED monitor instead. But if you have this right now and you're stuck with it, just know that I will do my best to report these issues to LG so that hopefully you can get a better monitor in time with future updates. Whether you're looking to connect a new console, gaming PC, or just need a fast and reliable HDMI cable to connect over long distances, Rupro has you covered with their certified 8K HDMI 2.1 fiber optic cable, available in sizes of up to 50 feet and can deliver a perfect full 48 gigabits per second connection over distances other cables could only dream of reaching. And with 48 gigabits per second of bandwidth, it can easily drive 8K 60 FPS or 4K 144 FPS 10-bit HDR video through its ultra-thin flexible stable and durable housing, and it even supports ER. So if you're in the market for a cable that can drive a beautiful new TV or monitor, be sure to check out Rupro on Amazon today.